prideful and had always said, don't let people get you too shaken up. And if people are getting you, riled up, you really suck it inside and, don't show any emotion. So Caril, in this interview, in this national interview that played everywhere, just responded very coldly and talked like this. And to make matters worse, the county attorney's office, who was, the people who were holding her were literally the ones who were charging her. They had her hair cut just before the interview, so she would look older already. And then she didn't help matters by being really, keeping all the emotion in. She was trying to be prideful and all that. But as a result, she just sounded and looked very robotic, and very much very cold and all that sort of thing. And a lot of people read that, even though what she was saying made sense. She was like, I fought him, I was wanting to get away, but I was too scared to run, and, all the factual things. If you read what she said there, it comes across very much of that she was a victim and she was, kidnapped by him. But if you watch it, it looks like she's, this cold-hearted kind of, sort of in on it with him or something like that. And that's the way a lot of people read it, and unfortunately that kind of backfired, and that kind of really affected the public opinion, in particular the jury, who the jury also saw her as a witness during the trial, and again got this kind of cold, robotic, even though factually what she was saying matched the physical evidence and showed that she was innocent, it looks like this, cold-hearted killer kind of thing, and that reputation has sort of unfortunately followed her ever since then.
I'm glad you mentioned the jury, because that's something I'm really curious about too, because, we're talking 1958, and I really want to get into the idea of, okay, so if I'm not mistaken, this was tried in or around Lincoln, Nebraska, correct? I know they
Correct.
were arrested in Wyoming, but they were actually extradited, correct?
Correct, yeah, because it all started in Lincoln. I guess that's something I didn't mention first, but they started in Lincoln, that's where both of them were from, and then he went out into the country, was killing people out there, and then continued west into Wyoming. So, okay. But yeah, the trial was in Lincoln.
How in the blue hell is it even possible to find jurors who know nothing about this case? I mean, you want to talk about a biased jury? I mean, this was a no-win situation all around for Caril Ann Fugate and Starkweather, but I mean, he did it, so I mean, who cares at that point? But you get my point.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're exactly right. In fact, my grandfather, that was one of the first thing he did was he tried to get it moved to juvenile court, which is, duh. She's 14 years old. Of course it should be in juvenile court, but they straight out disallowed it, which, again, is one of those protections you have today, but you didn't have back then. And then the second thing he tried to do was have it changed venue, because he's like, there's no way you can get a non-biased jury here in Lincoln, Nebraska, because this scared the hell out of everybody. I mean, this is one of those things where you ask people in Nebraska, especially around Lincoln, but pretty much anywhere in Nebraska, where they were, during the Kennedy assassination, most of them, I think I know where I was, you say during the Starkweather thing, I'll tell you exactly where I was. I mean, it's like, it is so embedded in their minds. It was a huge change. Everything changed at that moment. Everybody remembers vividly where they were and exactly what happened, because it was just so shocking, so striking. I mean, particularly the thing that was so scary was some of the people that Charlie killed was, when I mentioned the Ward family, that was like I said, a husband and wife and their maid inside of their own home. And this was a guy who was really close friends with the governor, and he had just come from visiting the governor. So, I mean, it's like, if they can get into that house, they can get anywhere. It was one of those things where it was such a gigantic panic. The National Guard was called out and was marching down the street. Gun stores sold out of guns literally within the hour. All of the guns around town were sold out immediately. So this was a huge thing that affected everybody. And there was just no way you were going to get a jury that wasn't, biased from the beginning. So
talk a little bit about how your grandfather, I know he tried to fight through the media, even though it was something he didn't want to do. But, from there, Starkweather's testimony, you want to talk about an unreliable narrator. I mean, the fact, and this just proves the entire thing as far as the jury goes, and the prosecution and the judge, that everybody just had their minds made up, and that was that, whether it was true or not, is that people are actually relying and listening to Charles Starkweather in a
Right.
trial of someone else. I mean,
Right.
most people would dismiss him outright, but they're taking his word seriously after he's changed his story I don't know how many times. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was just absolutely crazy. I mean, the thing is, to me, a lot of what that states is the power of celebrity. You know, the fact that Charlie just became so famous. I mean, here's this guy who they all unanimously revile, they all hate, but yet they will hang on his every word, and like other witnesses barely even listen to. I mean, there was one time I remember visualizing this when I heard about it, that Charlie had just gotten done with a witness stand or something like that, and he was being led out, and after him there was a scientific or medical expert, and nobody was listening to this medical expert. They're watching Charlie be led out. Here's a guy who saves lives, he's about medicine, about, helping people, and yet everybody would follow, or rather follow and watch, or not physically follow, but have their eyes followed this mass murderer, be led out. And so when he was called to the witness stand, the prosecution called him there to witness stand for Caril's trial, because he was, of course, the only living person who had seen. Well, that's not entirely true. There were a couple people who saw them a couple of times, but overall, he's the only witness to the majority of it, and he was the one person who was saying she was involved. Everybody else said she just seemed to be this mousy, scared little girl who was with them whenever they had seen them. But Charlie had been there, and he was claiming that she had helped kill these people and blah, blah, blah. And it's funny, when you read the, when you read the transcripts from the trial, at first the prosecuting attorney is, asking him some things, and Charlie just starts saying some kind of wild things. So the prosecuting attorney very clearly starts leading him. He goes, well, didn't this happen next? Yes. Well, didn't this happen next? And finally my grandfather's like, Your Honor, my God, or something like that. And the judge sort of begrudgingly says, no, now you can't lead him. And so from then on, Charlie's just like, he's telling this kind of wild story. Then my grandfather cross-examines, and Charlie tells like a completely different story. And then my grandfather called him on that. He's like, well, no, wait a second. A moment ago, you just said this happened. Well, no. And then he tells a third story right there, and he would contradict himself within seconds of telling it. And what's really particularly crazy is these stories that Charlie told are what have gotten out as the story of what's happened. A lot of times when people hear about the Charlie Starkweather Caril Fugate story, what they're hearing is a version of what Charlie told. So a lot of these things that you see on History Channel or Discovery or whatever, the source of their original, of the version they're telling as fact, actually has its birthplace in one of Charlie's stories that he changed a whole bunch of times before the court, and then changed innumerable times in the court. And this is what has always frustrated and annoyed me, is if somebody believes Caril's guilty for one reason or another, okay, but when they say, when they start saying, oh, here's what actually happened, and they quote his story as fact, I'm like, you're quoting a mass murder, an insane mass murderer who literally changed the story every single time. And you'll also hear contradictions, like you'll hear one documentary says this, another documentary says that, and it says a different thing. And the reason why there's that contradiction is because one is taking Charlie's story number 59, and the other one is taking Charlie's story number 28. So that's why there's so much confusion on this.
Well, I think it's one of those things where this is one of those cases where, just like the battery thing that I talked about, is that people think they're aware of what happened, and they've made up their mind without any facts. You know what I mean? They've heard stories, and it's kind of like Pluto's a planet. That's what we grew up with, and by God, we're going to fight it to the death to tell you. You know what I mean? And I really feel like no matter how many times you expose the truth to people like that, it doesn't matter to them. They prefer to know the story because it's much cooler and much more interesting to them, at least. Maybe, reality is more interesting to me. But it's more interesting to them to have the sweetheart murderers, not, the actual story of someone brought along against their will why a crazy person commits crimes across, Lincoln, Nebraska.
Right. Yeah, you are exactly right. That is exactly how I've felt about this as well. And part of the thing that's always frustrating to me, because I'm I think I got that from my grandfather, this feeling of just at least get the facts right and then go from there. But there's like a comfort, I think, that people have in this is what I already believe. In fact, actually, this is how I've kind of come to feel it is that I think that they attach their own ego with what they previously believed. So they're initially told, there's something that happened, and they attach their ego to it such that if it's found out that one thing is wrong, well, then their own ego has been shattered as a result of it, rather than just simply detaching themselves and going, oh, okay, I was just simply wrong. Or I was misinformed initially. They instead attach to the idea of, oh, I was wrong, and I can't be wrong, so therefore I'm just not going to listen to the facts,
Yeah, I grew up thinking dinosaurs were closer to lizards than birds. You know what I mean? And,
right.
And I still have a hard time wrapping my mind around that, even though I know it's pretty damn true from what we can tell. But you know what I mean? I think it's the same concept as to where people would rather try to prove something to be false than admit that they're wrong. And,
right.
But again, to go back 60 years here, we go through this trial, the trial that was unwinnable. It really was. It was unwinnable as far as I can tell. It didn't matter what your grandfather did. It didn't matter what Caril said. She could have been a better witness, and I still don't think it would have mattered. Because you talked about the jury, and I mean, this is a famous story, and people should know about this, of the juror who reportedly was taking bets on whether or not she would get executed or get the chair.
Right. That's exactly. Yeah, not just reportedly. He actually admitted to it. One of the jurors made a bet that Caril would get the chair, that she would be executed. I mean, imagine that. You're in you're up for murder, and one of the people deciding your fate has actually made a bet that you will be electrocuted. I mean, my grandfather named that as one of, I think, 70-some things with the case that were just unfair, because he was asking for a retrial, and he named that, that, and like I say, 70-some other reasons why he should have a retrial, and the judge, he didn't allow a retrial, and he named certain ones he pointed out as to, well, that's fine, and that was one where he was like, oh, but it didn't affect the verdict. I mean, the juror actually had a bet on whether or not she'd be convicted, on whether or not she'd get the chair, and no, that didn't affect whether or not, what his decision was. I mean, I guess
it's
I shouldn't.
unfathomable.
Right. I realize. I guess I'm realizing I probably shouldn't be laughing about it, but it's so absurd. It's one of those things that's just. I guess I laugh because of hearing so many people say she's so unquestionably guilty. I'm like, how could you possibly think that? I guess I shouldn't say whether or not they think she's guilty, but rather they say that she had a fair trial, and it's like, no, there's no way that was a fair trial, especially when you have such absurd things like that happening. So
these same people would tell you that they don't trust police, but yet they're going to take the word. That's another thing that we needed to get into. We haven't really talked about yet. The testimony of the police officer that she ran to in Wyoming. It was in Wyoming.
Right.
She ran to this guy. Yeah, she ran to the police officer looking for help. It tells him, he just killed a man and is trying to kill somebody else, and the guy takes her away from the danger. Other cops follow Charlie. They eventually, he turns himself in because he got shot at, got some glass here apparently. But I'll let you tell that part of it. But the way his story changes, nobody seems to care.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just, and the fact that people quote that to this day, when you ask a Nebraska about it, and they'll typically tell you the story of what Charlie told. And I mean, that's in particular I name History Channel Discovery because those are the two that really particularly burned me up. Or I'll see this. I shouldn't say just those two. There are a number of others. Every now and then there will be some new documentary come out, and it's like it's very clear they had decided what they wanted to tell to begin with, and then you'll hear the story they tell, and it's as fact, and it's one of Charlie's just wild stories. And I'm like, you guys skipped the part where he literally said that he did a double backflip while firing his gun, and then made some cheesy John Wayne kind of line. You conveniently took that part out of that story, but that's the story that you used as fact.
It's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, there was something else in there I was thinking too. That I forgot. There was that you brought. You brought up about the chase. Did you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. Break that down for